Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
Welcome to Legends in Leadership. This is Jason Smith, Family Officer with the Carrington Group, and my co-hosts today on the podcast are Dr. Blair Ritchie, Executive Director of the International Student Foundation, and Tyler Tallman, Fellow Family Officer with the Carrington Group. So as we do every week, we're going to kick things off with our leadership trivia question brought to us today from Tyler.
This legend was imprisoned by the Nazis in several concentration camps, including Auschwitz. His wife and family were killed by the Nazis, yet he managed to survive and would go on to write one of the 10 most influential books in the United States. By the time of his death in 1997, Man's Search for Meaning had sold over 10 million copies and been translated into 24 different languages. The Nazis took away many of his freedoms, but they could not touch his unwavering spirit and overcoming attitude. So the question is, do you know who this legend in leadership is? I'll be back at the close of today's program with that answer. Back over to you, Jason.
Great. Well, our guest today is Donnie Boivin. I've known Donnie for a little over 7 years now, and it's been that long.
It has been that long.
It has.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, at 22, right out of the Marine Corps, Donnie Boivin landed his first straight commission sales job, and after 20 years, he learned what it took to be successful in sales, business, and life. At that youthful age, he thought he knew enough to survive in one of the toughest professions in the world, being a sales professional. He quickly realized sales wasn't as easy as it looked. At the age of 40, he discovered he had been living other people's dreams and not chasing his own. Taking the biggest risk in his life, he jumped out on his own and started a business. Although he had great success at the start, he now understood he knew nothing about being a business owner. On the brink of failure and shutting down his business, he found podcasting and everything changed. Now he hosts a top 200 podcast on iTunes called Donnie's Success Champions and is helping the world one story at a time. Welcome to the show, Donnie.
Hey, guys. Glad to have you.
Well, we enjoy having leaders on the show that have traveled maybe difficult roads and blazed their own paths. But let's start early in life. Just tell us a little bit about childhood, growing up, and what was an influential mentor or leader in your early years?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. So the greatest influential leader of all time is my dad. He's just a good dude. He's the one that persevered through everything. But early off, 18, jumped out of high school, went straight in the Marine Corps. And I'd love to say it was like some patriotic duty type thing.
Right.
But yeah, no, I had no idea what the heck I wanted to be when I grew up. Had a brother who went in the Marine Corps, so I kind of followed his footsteps. Had no idea what the heck I was getting into, didn't know what I was signing up for. And I can very matter-of-factly remember laying in bed or rack and boot camp going, why the heck do I got to go through all this? Why does somebody got to yell at me, tell me where to go, where to be, where to eat, where to go to the bathroom? And the other thought, I'm like, you signed up for this, right? And what was crazy is after I graduated boot camp, I got out and they'd say, hey, you're now a Marine. The first thought that ran through my head wasn't, yay, I'm awesome, I accomplished something. The first thought that ran through my head was, wow, that was pretty easy. And that was kind of the frame for the rest of my life is as you're going through it, you don't always recognize that that's the moment where you're learning everything you need to learn to become the person you need to become to move forward in your life. So now I just look at every time it gets stacked up against me, it gets hard, it gets tough, it gets in anywhere, this is that time. This is that moment where you're fixing to learn the thing you need to learn because you're about to level up and hit the next level. So it was a great transformation in my life and a good portion of my journey.
Yeah. So the Marines obviously have their own style of leadership, maybe than the corporate world or even other branches of the military. So tell me a little bit about how leadership is developed in the Marine Corps.
You're told what to do on a regular basis, and you have no choice but to say yes. No, there is some truth to that. But leadership is really formed in any military organization through cohesive. Everything's a team. Everything functions as a solid unit. But it's a forced leadership style early on because you don't get any choice or say in the matter. You're just told what to do and when to do it. So, a lot of people that only did 4 years like I did in the Marine Corps, they'll tell you it was miserable only because you weren't allowed to really think for yourself. But you got to put it in perspective. In those situations, if somebody says charge that hill, you blindly charge that hill. And what's interesting is every step of that journey going through the Marine Corps, they're focused on turning you into something. A rifleman first in the Marine Corps, then they're focused on teaching you leadership traits. So you learn a lot by osmosis, but you also learn a lot by understanding what a really good leader is. And a good leader is somebody who's going to get in the trenches with you, right? They're going to climb in there and get dirty with you. And a bad leader, the guy is going to sit in the rear and just, bark out orders while eating a donut and drinking a coffee.
So you have to obey them all, but there's certainly a different level of engagement or respect for the folks that are in it with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're supposed to obey them all. I can't say that my path was definitely obeying them all. I was not your picture perfect guy, but you learn to show respect to the right type of leaders, and as a young guy going through, you learn to duck and dodge the ones that maybe were not the greatest in that moment,
Yeah.
But either way, following the lead of other great leaders was a really great tool for me to understand how to be in front of a room, still be direct, still be forceful, but not be disrespectful.
Yeah. So you go into the Marine Corps really not knowing direction for life.
I got out of the Marine Corps not knowing direction either.
So what did you do next then? What opportunity opened up for you from there?
So luckily, unfortunately, a lot of guys that get out of the military, they really struggle with transitioning because they went in not knowing what the heck they wanted to be when they grew up, and then they got out not knowing what the heck they wanted to be when they grew up. But they thought that the military was going to give them some sort of direction. So you're just as lost when you got out as when you went in. So interestingly enough, and thankfully for enough, my best friend and his dad had an HVAC company. And so I went to work for them. And the good of it was I had a job. The bad of it was I was doing HVAC in Texas.
Gosh.
So, you're crawling under houses and up in attics in 110-degree weather. And I think the hottest attic we ended up in was like 160 degrees. It was absolutely miserable. But moved into sales very quickly because I realized I didn't want to be the guy climbing under houses and attics and getting dirty. And long story short, I got recruited from there up to St. Louis, was in franchise sales for a number of years from there, bought out and worked for Cardinal Health for a couple years. Left that, came back home and, had a very successful career up there. But this was not long after 9/11. Couldn't find work anywhere.
Yeah.
So all my friends from high school were bartending and waiting tables. So I went bartending and waiting tables. Did that for 2 years, then was literally one of those stories that, people hear about, but they don't believe it's true, is I was hired from behind a bar.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, yeah, I got hired. No, you didn't. Yeah, I actually did. The gal who hired me, an awesome lady by the name of Jane Miranda, had went up to a conference. And this huge printing company up there had said, my top sales rep was my server at a restaurant. And Jane said as soon as she heard that, she knew who she was gunning for. So she came back and, as a bartender, I literally kept my resumes underneath the bar top. And, in case an opportunity ever struck, we always knew it never was going to. It just happened to do. But she came back and offered me a job, and I helped start a large digital printing division of their company, and we grew that to a huge company. And then the economy collapsed, right? You got 07, 08, 09, those wonderful years. The company went through bankruptcy, and we survived bankruptcy, but the company wasn't healthy at that point. So in the process of going through being sold and all of that world, I knew I had to go to a different new world. So I went out and found sales training, did that very successfully for a number of years, and that's where most people in the local market know me from, as being the sales guy. Then September this year, jumped out on my own and have been figuring it out. And I love to tell everybody, when I started my own business, I really thought with my brand, my reputation, I thought with my skill sets of being a sales guy that I was going to jump out and my business was just going to absolutely flourish, right? I thought it was going to be this hugely successful thing. And although it started very, very strong, I did quickly realize I had no idea what it meant to run a business. You know, everything I thought about being a business owner and entrepreneur was just wrong. I didn't understand, you know, there was nobody there to deliver the services I was selling. There was nobody there to handle the marketing. There's nobody there to do the accounting. There's nobody there to do the operational stuff, you know. So now I found myself not only being the guy sweeping the broom, but I also had to be the guy to pay the bills and you know, and understand what it was to develop a business around it. So literally, thank God I found podcasting, because that's what saved my business. But, you know, along that journey, one of my mentors told me a great lesson. He said, you'll never discover more about yourself until you become an entrepreneur. Because at no point in your life will you be stacked up against it where everything's on you.
Right.
Your successes, your wins, your losses. You have no choice. It's all on you. And that's when you'll figure out what you're really, really made of. And it's been one heck of a journey for me figuring all this out along the ride.
So growing up in sort of the sales culture, career path, I'm curious, you know, we can have sort of a negative connotation about the sales guy. What leadership role did you take to try and, both in your own sales career and then sales training, how did you help people overcome that stigma, or did you help them do things differently to not fall into that stereotype?
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, for me, I really despise most of the gurus that are out there from the sales perspective nowadays. These guys are, you know, came up from used car sales, and there's nothing wrong with being a car sales guy unless you're a car sales guy. But but they are in this very hardcore, you know, close it, nobody walks off my lot until I get their money, that kind of mindset. And that's where all of their sales stuff comes from. Well, if you try most of that stuff in the industry, you're going to get your teeth kicked in.
The trial close and the negative,
you know, the I don't know, you better, you know, buy today because the price goes up at Friday at 5 o'clock, whatever stuff.
Right, yeah, right.
You know, all this stuff. But the interesting thing is when I got into really into big time sales, I tried a lot of those tactics.
Okay.
You know, I thought that's what you had to be. You know, growing up as a young kid, I thought success was you had the nice suits and you had the nice cars and you had the
corner office and the window,
and all that stuff. And I realized that, dude, I grew up on a farm. You know, I own a farm now. You know, if I was trying to be that guy, then I wasn't myself. And so once I realized that if I just kept who I was true to myself, then I was able to find a lot more success in sales, because people want to buy from people. Right? They don't want to buy from jerks that are, you know, greasy, perfect, you know, nothing's wrong with them, because if they're perfect, their life is messed up, period. You know, so they wanted to deal with very average people, so I became that. So when I became a trainer, one of the biggest things I started telling people to do is relax, just be yourself. You know, it was so funny is I used to go do a lot of ride-alongs with new sales guy. And I'd go as the sales guy in training, right? Because I wanted to see what they did in the field. And I think a lot of sales managers should do that. They should go ride with their guys in the field. But it'd be so funny is on the way up to a sales call, we'd be riding along, and me and this young salesperson would be having a great conversation about their family and the vacations they're going on and all the stuff they're into. And then we'd pull up to the place where we're going to go do our meeting, and it's like this Jekyll and Hyde, right?
Right. Death grip. They're freaking out.
It's
clam
crazy.
up
And they become a completely different person. Well, I'm not going to bail them out, because I believe you learn everything through experience, right? So you need to go blow several sales calls so you can find who your rhythm are. And you also need to, that way you can find if you should be in sales or not. Because if you can't get getting punched in the face by life, then don't even get in the game. And, you know, we'd go through the sales call, they'd go in and they'd be fumbling, they'd be stuttering, and they'd be all over the place. We'd come out, and almost every time they'd look at me and go, "Man, I crushed it. That was such an awesome sales call." And I'm like, "Dude, that sucks."
I remembered all my lines. I got all my lines in.
One of the things that we talk about too is, you know, how important it is for you to have a quality of life as the guy that's in the room talking to the client. It is for them, because I mean, nobody wants the person that's, you know, got their hair on fire and they're completely disorganized and they're in there sweating, and you know, it's really comes down to that, just being real, be yourself, have fun with this. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, I think a lot of sales managers found themselves like in a sales manager role. Either they were really good and the company moved them into a sales manager, which, by the way, guys, that's the stupidest thing in the world to do.
Right.
Why take your number one asset out of the field?
Yeah.
Right? If somebody's crushing it in sales, let them stay crushing it in sales. Right? Don't pull them out. They're usually lousy sales managers anyways, because they can't teach what they do. But the other guys that get put in sales manager roles, they don't know how to coach, mentor, and guide these people along the way. So they're listening to all these gurus out there that are these, you know, try this strategy, do this thing, and it's stuff that they wouldn't do themselves, but they're teaching other people to do.
Well, some of them work long enough for everyone else to catch on to it. You know, so it's the novel sort of trick. Yeah. But then once it's used by a lot of people, and well, now everyone knows about it. It's about to come. I hear this one coming.
Yeah, one of my favorites is, I think it was Brian Tracy I was listening to growing up. And, you know, Brian Tracy had this, you know, I don't know, it was like the feel, felt, found thing that he taught for many years. Yep. And so I'm on a sales call, and I said, well, you know, some people feel this way. They felt this way. And the guy goes, oh, you listen to Brian Tracy too? And I'm like, well, all right, that was a good lesson. Don't use that one again. You know?
So Donnie, talk a little bit about you know, the advice that you give these salesmen. So you watch them fail, and you went in this particular story you're talking about. Here's this kid just completely epically failed. So he gets back in the car. So what are the things that he did during that sales call that made it a failure? And then what did you give him as advice to help him improve that and become a more tenured and professional salesman?
Yeah, great question. First thing I always asked them when we got back in the car after they said, hey, I killed it, and I said, no, you blew it, was would you buy from you? You know, would you in that moment have made a purchase from you in that moment? And it's usually a light bulb moment for them. They're like, yeah, no, I wouldn't have. I said, and then instead of me telling them what to do, now I'm going to start getting them to discover it on their own, which is, you know, now as a manager, start asking them the questions. What would you have done different? How would you have changed up? Why would you have done it different? What would that have done? What would that have proved? And the interesting thing is, I truly believe everybody knows all the answers. They know everything they need to do. But when you tell somebody what they should be doing, it doesn't make sense. But when they discover it for themselves, now the light bulbs start coming off. You know, and you know, we'll definitely talk about that. Take every script you have and throw it in the trash, right? Use it as some sort of guideline. But at the end of the day, people want to buy from people they trust, not know, like, and trust. Because you don't have to like anybody to do business with them. You just got to trust them, right? And I hate the phrase know, like, and trust, because everybody hears that word like, and now they just want to go make friends with everybody. Yeah. Well, I have several people that I like a lot that I've never bought a dang thing from, right? You know, so it's got to get down to trust. And the only way you establish trust with some people is if you meet them on their level. And you have to maintain a level of equal business stature when you walk into the room. So a lot of things we had to teach down here in the South, in particular, was, you know, you got to take the yes sir, no ma'am out of your vocabulary, because when you walk into an office and you say yes sir, you say no sir, you say yes ma'am, no ma'am, you immediately put yourself in a subservient role, right? And you know, so it was teaching them the minor things, the minor tweaks that they could go out and try it again. And you know, it was the other things of teaching them how to evaluate every call they went on. You know, most people go on a sales call, they go out and they wing it with whatever they're trying to pull off, and then they just go to the next sales call without any thought process on, you know, what went right on that call, what went wrong on that call, what did I learn from that call. So
they have just a numbers game approach. Like, if I just do this 100 times, I'm bound to get 1 or 2. Instead of trying to improve.
Yeah. Whether it's good or bad. If I do 100 of them, surely somebody's going to buy from me, right?
Absolutely. You know, and the number one reason people fail in sales is because of everything going on between their ears. You know, people are so worried about what other people think about them that when they get on a sales call, there's this whole, you know, dichotomy is like they're back in high school, you know, and they're on the playground again and they're trying to be part of the cool kids. So it's always interesting to get people to, for the first time in their life, start really looking internally. Because if you get everything between your ears right, sales becomes really, really easy. You know, and when you can stop worrying about, that person, what they think of you in the moment, then sales gets really, really, really easy. But a lot of people don't spend enough time working on themselves because they're scared of what they'll find, right? If I open up Pandora's box between my ears, then that might be a really dark place there.
You have to get real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people their entire lives have lived that they've got to live for somebody else, impress somebody else, do something else, that they struggle with finding the success that they should be finding.
So you have success in sales. You have success as a sales trainer. Now, as an entrepreneur, what was sort of that transition like into now running your own business? And more specifically, describe that phase where it was like, hey, this isn't working. I got to do something else. Well, what was sort of the light bulb moment for you there?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was 6 months into running my business, and I was really contemplating. I'm like, dude,
And what was it initially? What was the initial objective of that business before the?
I really thought I was going to be Tony Robbins.
Okay,
that's what you wanted me to say. I really thought that I was going to go be the big name on stage and do all that, and there's still some aspiration for that, but that's a lot of work, right? And I knew in a short amount of time that wasn't a scalable business model, so I went after just coaching and doing some speaking and stuff, and that worked to an extent, but I didn't know how to run a business, so the model was just ineffective. So from there, I was really in that spot of deciding, okay, this isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
I may have to go get another real job. And go back to being a sales guy, a sales manager, something. But luckily, I had one more speaking engagement, and I went to the speaking engagement, and I'm just one of the guys that wants to leave it on the stage every time I go, and I had a lot of fun. Somebody out of the crowd came up to me and said, hey, I really enjoyed your speech. Would you come be on my podcast? And I said, what's a podcast? And he walked me through it. So I went, was a guest on the show, had a blast. But after his show, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you more about what you do, your services, your training, your coaching. And I'm like, wait, this is a prospecting thing? I can get clients doing this?
Right.
So I went like a madman. And for like the next 30 days, I was on like 60 different podcasts. I mean, if I found out you had a podcast, I was coming for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened to be, this is so funny for me, is I was on one podcast that was just horrible. I mean, this guy was so bad. He had 20 questions. And he had them laid out. And we started off, and he goes, question 1. Right? And then he goes, question 2, question. About question 3, I realized he's just going to keep going. So me being me, I'm like, so tell me your story. And he goes, question 4. And, he goes through this whole thing. And I'm like, oh, my God, if this guy has any chance of having any success whatsoever, I'm starting a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So I launched it, and the podcast that's seen all the success now is actually my second one. The first one failed miserably, and I did all the right things. Right, I hired a coach. I went everything, and two things I learned about my leadership role in that moment is if I can't explain to somebody very explicitly what I want done, they won't do what I need done.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of leaders, fail as they can't articulate what the end goal of they're trying to accomplish is. A lot of times they're like, oh, I want to do this project, just figure it out. Well, that's not leadership, right? There is a means where somebody needs to go fall on their face, but you gotta let them know where you're trying to get to as part of that process. And so that was a great lesson learned for me. So when that first podcast didn't go so well, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this myself. And I knew I had to create a trap. So I said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do a daily show.
Oh,
I'm going to have a new show come out every day, which means I got to ramp up and figure it out quickly. And it did. And it got really successful really, really quick.
So it's a sort of feeling, if you're going to succeed or fail, do it on your own terms rather than this other person's sort of set of expectations.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to you got to bet on you.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of people are just not willing to fully bet on you. I mean, and that's why a lot of people work for other people. There's that security blanket, which is a cool thing.
Yeah.
Right? We need those people that want that security blanket. But don't in the same hand tell yourself that I'm going to go be the greatest, most richest, wealthiest person in the world and then not be willing to bet on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, I mean, Donnie, you've obviously done this the hard way. I mean,
as everything in my life.
Yeah, well, as most entrepreneurs do it, they do it the hard way. But looking back at the young Donnie, you know, and even post Marines, but looking back at the young Donnie, what is the top 2 or 3 things that you say, man, I wish I would have done it that way, or I could have probably sped this process up if I would have just done it this way. What does that look like for you? And what
number one for me was live life purposely. And what I mean by that is I was always the guy that just took what was ever in front of me, right? I never went after a job to learn a skill set. I never went after the job to learn leadership skills. It was, oh, you're hiring? Oh, you want me? Okay, cool. I'll come on board. And then in there. So that would be absolutely number one. I mean, Mark Cuban talks about it in one of his books, that's one of his success things, is he never took a job to just take a job. He took a job to learn a skill set, which is just really, really cool.
Yeah.
The second thing is I would have screwed up a hell of a lot more earlier. I played the safe game a lot of times in sales, and I didn't go big enough early enough. And it wasn't until later in my sales career that I realized that I was playing the middle game and not going after the bigger deals, the bigger things. It was amazing once you started going after and taking a bigger risk, how much more you learned about the world and how you work. And it was interesting is when I went after those bigger things, a lot of my fears popped up. And it was fears of, I'm a country boy. It was fears that, I can't handle these big room conversations.
Right.
And then I found myself just fine in those big room conversations. They didn't care where I came from.
How'd you break through that? How'd you get past your fears?
Getting punched in the face by life a lot. And putting myself in a situation. I got to the point where, I gave myself a trigger, and everybody should do this, is when you feel that fear pop up, go straight at it. Whatever that fear is that pops up in your mind, go straight at it, because every time, I have a huge CEO across the room that I knew I needed to get to whether it was selling printing, whether it was selling franchise, whether it was selling, training, whatever, I needed that person. If for 2 seconds I froze, and I was thinking, man, that guy doesn't want to talk to me, I said go. And every time I went, it turned into something awesome. It may not always turn into business, but
Right.
it turned into relationships. So for me, it was going at it and continuing to go at it. And I'm a little bullheaded, a little stubborn, so sometimes it takes me going at it more times than others before I realize, okay, dude, that doesn't work. Quit banging your head against the wall. But that was the biggest thing for me, was constantly pushing forward when I didn't want to.
I know we're running short on time, but we talked a little bit pre-show about social media, and I think for our listeners, this is a big deal. It's okay. So you created this podcast, and you're going out and you're trying to create a name for yourself. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you can leave the listenership with about social media and the best way to get your name out there?
Yeah, 100%. So first and foremost, the guys that keep telling you that content is king, they're dumb. Content is not king. Engagement is king. If you're on social media right now and people aren't engaging with your post, then you need to change the game. So to get engagement, start asking questions. The other thing is you need to be putting out a massive volume of content. If anybody's ever heard of Gary Vee, I mean, that guy's got the whole 1 piece and 80 pieces things. That's serious things, guys. I mean, if anybody follows me on all my social media stuff, which I'm sure will get posted somewhere, but you'll see that I'm putting out a ridiculous amount of content. And the reason you have to do that is there's so much content out there right now that if you're not being seen, you're not being seen. Quit just putting things out there because you think they're supposed to, that's what some gurus told you to do. Put things out there and test it and try it. See if it worked. If it didn't work, try something else and keep putting it out there. And you need to be putting out every type of content. You need to be doing videos. You need to be doing articles. You need to be doing blog posts. You need to be doing memes, content, all those type of things, and get it out there. And, if you need help, call me.
Well, we like to wrap up each show with a question for our guest, and that is, what's a book that made an impression on you, and what's the one nugget you could share with us from that book that stuck with you?
Sure. So my dad, who was the biggest influence in my life, I think a lot of it was, hand me a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill at the age of 14, okay? And I love telling this story. Is he handed it to me at 14. Yeah, I didn't read it till I was 22. And I'd like to say that book changed my life. But it wasn't because of the content in the book. what it did is it opened me up to the world of there's people that teach this stuff. Right. So going through sales, I'm like, wow, if somebody will teach all this mental stuff, I bet somebody teaches sales. So I started finding sales gurus. People will teach public speaking. So I took public speaking stuff. People teach this stuff that you don't have to go it alone. And that book literally opened me up to that world to learn, that there are people out there that have been through it already. Go learn from them.
Yeah. Leverage the other people's experiences.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, we truly appreciate you being on the show today with us, Donnie. It's been a lot of fun getting to know you a little bit better and some of your lessons learned. And appreciate you being on.
Absolutely, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So I'll turn it back over to Tyler for our wrap-up on the trivia question.
Well, this week's legend in leadership is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, great story. Enjoyed going and doing a little bit more research on that as well. So Viktor Frankl is the answer to that. So back over to you, Jason.
Thanks. Well, again, thanks to Donnie Boivin. We'll post some of the links to his podcast, website, etc., in the comments of this video here. And hope you had fun with us today. We certainly enjoyed having you.
It was horrible. No, thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Wish we could have had more.
Well, folks, we'll leave you this. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. Thanks for joining us.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by ISF and Carrington Group. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphan youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. Google International Student Foundation to learn more. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. Google Carrington Group Dallas, Texas to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, and SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.